Cool. Well, thank you everybody for coming. I hope you guys are enjoying your Ignite experience so far. We're really happy to have you here. So what we're going to talk about today is how accessibility is everybody's job, especially at Microsoft. This is not, when we think about accessibility, sometimes we've heard, oh, it's just the PM's job, or oh, it's just the engineer's job. What we're going to talk about is how it's everybody's job, especially at Microsoft. So with that, now that we've got to know each other, my name is Luke Gaylor. I'm a senior program manager at Microsoft and the accessibility lead for one of our CSEO organizations. And my friend Manish is also a senior accessibility program manager. So Manish works across all of our core services in engineering operations organization, helping them get their tools and products accessible.
Good morning.
Okay. So this is really interactive, so raise your hand, yell, throw stuff at me. Don't throw them at Manish, please.
I'm behind the podium.
He's behind it, that's true. So when we think about accessibility, a lot of the time we think about those just very straightforward disabilities, right? People who use a wheelchair, the visual disabilities. We also think about hearing, right? Folks who are low hearing or no hearing at all. But what we really need to think about too is also cognitive, speech, and then the neural space, right? Accessibility, we're starting to scratch the surface on some of these other areas. We try to design for those most commonly found disabilities. So real quick, I like to do a little exercise. Don't feel like you have to participate. But if I could just have everybody raise your hand. Okay, I'm going to rattle off some scenarios, and I want you to put your hand down when I hit one that applies to you. Do you wear glasses or contacts?
Put it down.
Put it down. All right. See, only a couple people so far, right? All right, you guys are best friends now, Allie. Okay, how many of those two, with your hand still up, have you ever had a sports injury where broken leg, hand, finger, knee surgery, broken ankle, sprained ankle? Okay. Okay. For the last person standing, we have a prize for you. No, I'm just kidding. You're here. You get to see us. So then think about like, have you ever gotten a really important text while you were driving that you couldn't respond to? Okay. These are all examples of either permanent, like I have glasses, right? They're either examples of permanent or temporary disabilities. Right? And for instance, I've had numerous injuries from sports and just overall not taking care of myself. So just like walking around on crutches or having an air cast, right? Life becomes a little different. So and then there's some other experiences that we don't see. There's those non-visible disabilities as well, right? How many people in here have ever had dinner or had coffee with somebody that won't sit with their back to the front door? Right? So that potentially could be a sign of somebody who has PTSD or anxiety disorder of having to see their entire surroundings in front of them so that they have that space to move around. Another example for the folks that are wearing their lanyards, the buttons that we got, if you have those, talk to me anytime, talk to me if you know me, I'm not talking right now. Those are very important because those signal too that somebody that's anxiety, right? In a big conference like this, if you're over in the hub, that can be really overwhelming for somebody who has an anxiety disorder, right? So those are just some examples. And Manish is going to walk through some data around specifically the community. Manish?
Sure. So according to WHO, there's about 1 billion people. There's about 1 billion people in the world with some kind of a disability. Now, billion is such a large number, it's hard to comprehend, but it's not some billion people living out there. As Luke just demonstrated, it's essentially all of us, right? Even if we're not a part of that billion right now, as we grow old, as we age, go through life, meet with accidents, fall ill sometimes. We become a part of the billion. That billion is a moving demographic. As of 2019, in the world, there are more people who are older than 65 than there are kids who are less than age 5. So the world is definitely growing older. In Japan, in 2019, they sold more adult diapers than they sold kids' diapers. So, and that's an international trend. Age catches up to you, you become a part of the billion. But even then, that number remains like not very comprehensible. It's too large. So let me give you a smaller number that maybe you can relate to. Let's pick up one of the spectrum of disability that Luke talked about. Let's just pick up blindness, for example. And in the developed world, let's say in the US alone, the percentage of blind people who are gainfully employed is about 11%. 89 to 90% of the blind population is either not employed at all or underemployed. So just imagine the level of social impact you can have by making sure that when you build applications, when you build software for the enterprise, you're not building barriers for employment of these people. And this number was for the developed world. You extrapolate this to developing countries and underdeveloped nations where a larger percentage of these populations live, that number suddenly falls to below 0.01% or something, right? So it is and that is just one category of the large spectrum of disabilities. So the sheer impact of that work, and that is not something that you get to do every day, right? I mean, you build software, it's a job. It's not every day that you realize that what you're doing could potentially change the life for so many people, give them the opportunity to earn their own livelihood. That's, the next slide, we talk about Microsoft's mission, where, Microsoft's mission is to empower every person on the planet to achieve more. And every person does include that billion, right? It does include people with disabilities. According, Satya says the next decade of innovation is going to come through inclusive design and universal design. And I'll talk about more about that on the next slide, but I want to make two more points here. One is that accessibility cannot be a compliance exercise. Most of the times when most organizations treat it as a legal issue, as a compliance issue, and they start looking at accessibility towards the end of the life cycle when the product is going to be released or the software is going to go live. And that's the wrong way to look at it. It has to be baked into the product. Thinking of accessibility as a compliance issue in doing it at the end is similar to let's say, is analogous to you're trying to build a building, you do the interiors, and then you call the inspector, they come in and tell you that all the halls and all the doorways need to be a foot wider, right? Just imagine how hard that will be. There are walls which are load bearing, there's plumbing, electrical going through those walls, there's carpeting, all kinds of things. It might be easier to gut that whole building and redo it all over again. That's true for software as well. When you build your entire software and then try to do accessibility, it is just incredibly hard and costly to do it at that point. And what you get is a band-aid of solutions which get you to compliance maybe, but nowhere near a usable product, which is really what would have helped in the first place, which is why you put in all the effort. So the importance of baking in accessibility, to building it into your products in the enterprise, is super critical, and we'll talk about that more. Let me come back to the reasons why we do it. So it's our mission. We don't just do it for compliance, but the most important thing, and that's the next slide, we do it for innovation. So again, a WHO quote here. The WHO says disability is a complex phenomenon which involves the features of person's body and it's mismatched to the features in the environment. Which is to say that, let's say your legs don't work. So you cannot go from point A to point B, but you can use a tool like a wheelchair, and then you can go from point A to point B. So the disability has gone away. Your legs still don't work, but you no longer have a disability which was preventing you from going between two places. Now, if the only route between those two places has stairs, then you still have the disability. Now, the disability is not in the person, is not in the tool, it's in the environment, because the environment prevented the use of that tool. So it is when we build our software to match the needs of the people who are using it, the tools that they use to access that software, is when we get accessible software. And as we noticed, that is everybody, right? I mean, everybody needs it at some point or the other, so might as well start building for everybody and not just for a few. So when we add these constraints of everybody and their different tools and their assistive technologies, those constraints give us the opportunity to innovate in ways that we would not have thought of otherwise. And we've seen that over and over in a lot of cases in the software world and in the hardware world. We've had Xbox, they released a couple of games with closed captioning on for people with loss of hearing. So they realized that about 62% of all users were turning closed captions on, which is strange because obviously not 62% of all players of that game had a hearing problem. So the next version of those games, they turned them on by default. And more than 97% of all users kept those on. And these were popular games. I think Call of Duty, I forget the names, but these are very popular games, and 97% of all users left them on, which was a revelation in the sense that this was a feature they were building in primarily for accessibility, but everybody found it extremely useful. This is also referred to as the curb cut effect. If you've heard that term, the curb cuts. Who has not here dragged like a shopping cart or a suitcase or a baby stroller on the sidewalk? The curb cuts on those sidewalks were created by legislation for wheelchair users, and everybody benefits, right? So we see it in the software world and in the outside world all the time, that when you build inclusively, when you build a product for people with disabilities, you end up building a better product overall. Our we built an immersive reader into the OneNote, and I'll show a demo of what the kind of social impact it had on students, on kids who were trying to read but had problems because of dyslexia and other similar conditions. There's a quick video we'll play.
So just real quick, I'll just tell you, every time I see this, I like get teary-eyed. So I hope you guys have the same experience.
Yeah, and if you have a strong emotional experience, like, feel free to walk out. Some people have had like strong emotional reactions to this. Yeah.
Holly Springs Elementary.
The true purpose of education is to create possibility.
It was a little hard for me. People laugh whenever I read sometimes.
Well, they knew how to read, and I didn't. 1 in 5 students are impacted by dyslexia.
I will never be good at reading. I will probably be held back again.
Individually highlighted words read. Microsoft Learning Tools is software that helps improve reading skills.
It highlights the words to know where I am. When it's reading, I see spaces between the words. And it's easy to focus on. The first time I actually could read that book, I was proud of myself. I was very proud of myself. Good job, Jody.
When technology and education come together, possibility becomes reality.
I want to read every book in here.
Empowering us all. Microsoft. Microsoft.com/empowering.
So that's a really interesting thing to see, right? When we talk about inclusive design, it's very impactful for somebody who struggles with dyslexia, and you see the change in the dynamic and how those kids feel, not only about themselves, but how they're gonna do in their schoolwork, right? So I have an 11-year-old daughter who has some learning disabilities. So this is really near and dear to my heart. Myself, I'll give you guys a little insight into my world. So I have ADD, and I struggled with it my entire childhood. And it was always, Luke's too hyper, like he needs to, but until I got to that point, I see a couple people from Microsoft kind of giggling because I'm still that way. But yeah, it is okay. You're right. It is totally okay. And so having somebody tell you that there's nothing wrong with you and you know it is demoralizing for somebody. I did a session like this for one of our teams in India, and I just want to share this because I think it's super important. And this engineer came up to me. He was a fairly new engineer, and he came up to me and he said, I'm just really impacted by what you talked about. And he proceeded to tell me about his brother, who his brother for his entire life said to his parents and to his teachers, I'm colorblind, I can't see color, and everybody just blew it off. So he goes to school, he goes to university in India for mechanical engineering. He graduates and he goes to apply for a job, and they do a color blindness test, and they find out he's colorblind. So now, in his field, he can't do his job because he's colorblind, but he went through university, right? So the impact, even as adults. Now, imagine you're able-bodied, you might wear glasses, but for the most part, you can do your job. The products you build, the internal tools, regardless of how many users, you have them inside, and you're fine, you can work day to day. But what if something happens? What if something happens tomorrow where you lose your sight, or you lose your hearing, you have an accident, and you go to work, and those tools don't work anymore for you? That's how we have to think about this, because there's a human on the other side of accessibility always. It's always another human. It's the people you work with day in and day out, and you may not know it. You may never know the people that you work with have a disability of some sort. If I took my glasses off, you would never know, right? But there's those hidden ones that we sometimes miss, and we don't think about them. So it really starts with inclusive design. And when we at Microsoft start to recognize those exclusions, so we have that difficult conversation, we get a little uncomfortable when we have to recognize that we're excluding people, right? It doesn't feel good in our gut. However, when we start to solve for one, it extends to so many people, right? Like Manish was talking about, the curb cutouts, right? Those were originally designed for folks who utilize assistive technologies and wheelchairs. But for the parents in the room, or if you've ever been grocery shopping, those are fantastic. And then we learn from our diversity. And when we start to integrate that user feedback into our testing and support cycle, it just makes things better for everybody. So one of the things that Satya has brought to Microsoft, and he talked about it yesterday in the keynote, and he touches on it almost every time, is exclusion, inclusion. So exclusion happens when we start solving for problems using our own biases. If I start solving for tools that just work for me, I'm excluding a big part of my community at work, at home, etc. But at Microsoft, it's a safe place, and we seek out those exclusions. We look for where we're excluding people, and we use those as opportunities to create new ideas and inclusive designs. So I'm going to say that one more time. At Microsoft, we seek out those exclusions. We look inwardly, and we're testing our own biases. And then we use those as opportunities to create new ideas and inclusive designs, like the dyslexia demo we just saw, right? So another example of that is this. How many people have seen this before if you're not from Microsoft? Right. So this is the adaptive controller for Xbox. This has gotten a lot of press lately, and for good reasons. So at Microsoft, we do these yearly hacks where everybody comes together in a great big tent, we eat lots of really good food, and we spend hours and hours and hours looking at hack projects. This came from a hack project, the Xbox One control, the adaptive controller. But what's the difference here? Let me go back into it. So look at the packaging. So it's great we designed a controller for folks, but you have to design for the packaging as well. So you can't just take an adaptive controller, throw it in a normal box that's really difficult to open and get the controller out of. So the designers really went through and looked at how do we help folks that have dexterity issues, right? Not complete dexterity control of your digits. So this is really easy. They can pull it out, they can open the box really easily. And this is where you start to seek out those exclusions, and it turns into these really awesome, innovative ideas and designs. Okay? Any questions so far? It's totally interactive. You guys are awfully quiet. Okay. So the next slide really talks about the assessment versus the assessment of maturity. And this is all, I'm sure most of you have seen this. This is from Carnegie Mellon. And it really talks about where you fall on the maturity model when it comes to accessibility. And you start, in a place where you're not compliant, no assessments on any of your tools, and then you start to see that arc move up into the level 5 optimization space. Now, for the partners and the sellers in the room, I'm sure most of us are selling software or products. What we're starting to see across this, if you look along that bottom arrow that runs left to right, is that we're really starting to see that accessibility built into products and tools is driving and becoming a selling differentiator for a lot of companies. So we work with a lot of third parties in our space. So we'll sit down with them and say, your tools need to be accessible. We've made a commitment at Microsoft that the tools that we ship, that we purchase, procure, they're going to be accessible products across the board. Satya has said it multiple times. His leadership has said it multiple times. It is what we live. Now, we'll sit down with some of these companies, and what we find is that sometimes they're like, we don't know where we are. That's great. We'll help you along that journey. And then other times, they'll sit down with us and they'll go, okay, we know we're not accessible. We're not going to be accessible for a year. And so, but they're starting to make progress on that. And I'll share this. We were working with a third party, and they had a number of issues on their tools, and very basic stuff, color contrast, alt text images in their tool. And they came to us and they said, hey, we're gonna take this seriously. We're gonna be accessible in 9 months. I said, okay, well, we're not gonna ramp the number of users from our internal, for Microsoft users until it's all fixed. So then they come back and they go, okay, well, we can pull it in 3 months. Fantastic. And then what we found is that the culture started to change in that company. Their VP of engineering got involved. And this is not a very big company. This is not a Microsoft scale company. Not very many employees, under 2,000 employees. And they started to talk about how do we build this into our normal engineering pipeline? How do we think about inclusive design? They brought in an accessibility expert. They built a team solely to focus on their product, and they started accelerating how they were rolling out their changes into their tool. And then a couple weeks later, they came back and they said, hey, we've completely changed our engineering culture, not just for this specific engagement, but across the entirety of our company and our engineering lifecycle. And by the way, we're going to be accessible by the middle of December. It was just fascinating. It's a fascinating case study around, and you guys will probably see that here pretty soon. We're building a story around that with that partner. And this is what we start to see, is that when people dig into accessibility, when they start to realize that it's impacting people that work in their space, that work in the cube next to them, when they work down the hall, it really accelerates a change in culture within these engineering groups. And they take it seriously. We have another third party, and their engineers alone started getting in rooms together going, how do we adopt this? They've never thought of it before. We've gone to them and said, hey, what's your accessibility status? Can we help you along? And so when we finally started putting a little more pressure on them, the engineers and multiple different product groups started going, how do we change this? How do we keep moving forward? How do we change the culture of our engineering teams? So we start to see this organic adoption of accessibility in these engineering teams. And we move away from compliance. So how many people in here work on security and privacy? Okay. How many people bake it into their engineering practices? Privacy and security. Right? Yeah. So here's what happens. When you start to lump that into compliance, there's not a human-centered focus on the other side. It becomes a check-the-box exercise. And it's not a check-the-box exercise. This is affecting the people that you work with day in and day out if we're not doing accessibility. And that's the same for us at Microsoft. So the next slide, I'm going to have Manish dig into a little bit more around maturity and compliance.
Sure. Luke talked about building accessibility into your engineering processes, and that's where maturity comes in. So these are some of the things that we measure when we look at our maturity as an organization, as an engineering org, as a product organization, as an enterprise. These are by no means like all the things you could measure. These are a few examples of some high-level things. Things like you need to have a common standard across the enterprise that everybody is targeting to as a baseline, right? Common standards, common tools that everybody uses, how to test. Then you need to be able to identify all the apps that need to be accessible. Ideally everything would be accessible, but you cannot, if you're just starting, you cannot boil the ocean right away. So you need to identify and prioritize your applications. And there's a lot of ways of prioritizing. You could prioritize by the number of users, job impact, what are the key scenarios you want to enable? Do you already have people in certain roles that need certain tools to be accessible? Any of those could feed into the prioritization. So long as you have it clearly defined, you're maturing and improving. I want to talk more about the last two though, building competency and awareness and in the engineering and design teams, and building accessibility into your user research, design, and engineering processes. Now, these four are not linear or sequential by any means. They feed into each other. You can do them in parallel. And for example, when you start doing user research and when you start doing design and getting it validated with users with disabilities, your engineering teams learn a lot. And the awareness and competency just improves exponentially right there. So what is important is to build the accessibility into your sprints, into your day-to-day development cycles, and not leave it as a testing exercise towards the end. It's similar to to test-driven development, right? I mean, it is everybody who's been an engineer understands that TDD has proven its worth. The more you test, the earlier you test, the often you test, the more often you test, the better product you'll get. And that's true for accessibility, with the added advantage that the awareness that it brings is not something that you can teach people. The awareness and the empathy, it's something that you build slowly. And I want to show a demo of a small app we're building internally for Microsoft employees. And the way we have built accessibility into the engineering process and how that has helped, I'll show some of the things
Graphic user profile picture from Annie Chagall.
that our engineers learned from that experience.
Double tap to
So I'll put this down because there's only an external mic that will work.
my board. Heading.
That mic needs to be turned on. Okay.
Graphic user profile picture from Annie Chagall. My board. Notification center. View menus for SVMT Cafe and other cafes menu item.
So this
One
application,
finger double tap and hold to drag the tile. Two finger double tap to delete the tile.
this application is a simple application that helps employees do things like view the menu in the cafe or book their shuttle from one office to another, look at their vacation days and things like that.
View menus for SVMT
Let,
Cafe.
let's go into the view menu option. So I can go in here,
Cafe. Selection drawer collapsed.
I can
Select Cafeteria Cafe. Selection drawer expanded. Cafe Millennium E. Cafe RTC 5. 2
That-
of 41.
let us
Button.
select RTC 5.
Back. Button. Cafe RTC 5. Heading.
And let me look at the menu here.
Characters. Headings. The market. Heading. Market fresh salad. Made to order with a variety of fresh ingredients. Topped with your choice of protein. $5.99/$7.99.
What you heard there was the name of a dish, its description, and a price. Okay. In the first iteration of that, these, when I was using VoiceOver, I needed to swipe 3 times, once for the dish, once for the description, and once for the price, right? I mean, every time I swipe right, I'll go to the next item and that will be read, which is compliance. But if I needed to get to the 20th dish in that list, I would have to swipe right 60 times, right? That basically makes it not usable for me. What we did was make this as a group for a swipe, added headings, and I can just go down the headings
Entree. Heading. Vegetarian station. Heading.
and
Roasted vegetable.
go to
Daily
the
selection
item
of fresh roasted
in
vegetables.
there which I'm
50
interested in.
cents /Oz.
What that allowed me to do, instead of 60 swipes, now I can get to the 20th item maybe in 3 or 4 swipes, right? And that's what a person thinking of it from a compliance point of view would never understand. Other things like the back button here. It was not placed where all iOS apps have their back button by default, just because the designer thought it was looking cool somewhere else. But it turns out a lot of the assistive technology users expect it to be at that particular location because that's the standard. So not building to the standard
Cafe weekdays back. Button.
caused people to not be able to find that button. More importantly, there's a scrub action, like as if I was scrubbing something to go back, and that was not supported. Because we tested this early on, like in the very first time they added the back button there, it was identified right there, and they were able to build it into the application framework rather than having to find it after building 20 screens and having to retrofit it on each of the screens, right? There's another example of that behavior that I want to demo.
Chipotle rockfish tacos. Corn tortilla tacos. View menus for SVMT. View menus for graphic user profile. View menus for SVM. Book a shuttle menu item. Book
If
a
I
shuttle
go into
menu
the
item.
shuttle,
Book a shuttle. Heading. Choose your booking option. Pick up building. Selection drawer collapsed. Drop off building. Selection drawer collapsed. Select location. Drop off building. 109. One
let's
of
say
9.
I select 109.
Drop off building. Selection drawer collapsed. 109 selected.
What just happened there was that I swiped about 4 times, got to the drop down for the drop off building, and then made a selection there. By default, when this was built in the beginning, after I made the selection, the focus went to the top of the screen, which for a sighted user is okay because they are going to touch the next item that they are interested in, right? So they don't care where the focus is. But if I am an assistive technology user, if it went back to the top of the screen, I will have to swipe back 4 times again to get to where I was and then move on to the next item. And this was 4 times, but you could have a more complex screen where this was the 10th time I had swiped, right? So the active focus management on screen changes is an important design input that again they were able to build into the application framework. Now every page there's just a function that they need to call. It's not a lot of work for the engineers, and they understand that this focus is an important thing for users, and I have to manage the focus carefully. Another example of something the engineers learned early on in the dev cycle.
One finger double tap and hold to home. Selected. Dashboard.
These
Tab.
tabs
2 of
at the
3.
bottom,
Button.
let me make you hear that one once
Home.
again.
Selected. Dashboard. Tab. 2 of 3. Button.
So it gave a few pieces of information. Selected, it said selected, it said it's a tab, it said the name of the control, which is that dashboard. It said 2 of 3, which means that there are 3 tabs, and this is the second one. And it said it's a button. I have turned the hints off, but if after a slight pause, it would have also told me that to click a button, you have to double tap here, right? So these are 4 or 5 different pieces of information. When the engineers tried to build this first, they tried to use just plain buttons instead of trying to use like a native tab control for this purpose. And then they were struggling with people who were using assistive tools because they were not getting all this information in the correct, either not getting it or not getting it in the correct order, or it was slightly different from the standard way it is announced. The pause was not enough, all kinds of things. Something that they could easily fix by, oops, sorry, that was not me. Something they could easily fix by simply using the native tab controls provided out of the box, right? I mean, they didn't have to do all that hard work. They did not. This has all been thought through for them. All you need to do is to be able to use the standard controls for the purpose. Again, they would not have realized this if this was tested towards the end, and then it would have been much harder. This is just the main tabs, but there could be tabs all over the place, all over the application, and So those are some of the examples of things that engineers learn when we do assistive technology or accessibility testing early and often. Like we talk about the spectrum of disabilities. There's such a large spectrum. Even within a given disability like vision, you have people with who wear glasses, who have low vision, people who cannot see in bright light, people who cannot see in low light, people who are colorblind, people who see only in one eye, people who are completely blind, right? Each of that group of users uses a different set of tools and technologies. Some people use high contrast, some people use dark mode, some people use magnifier, I use a voiceover. And so we don't, as developers, as engineers, as designers, we don't understand all those users, let alone their tools. Like I am very often, when I meet people, I'm like the first blind person they've ever met. So we don't understand these users or their tools. A lot of those disabilities, like especially in the cognitive and neural space, they are understood very little even medically, let alone in the software world. So when we have such a large spectrum of users who we don't understand their tools and technologies, how do we build for them, right? That's the question. And the only way to build for them is to learn with them and to stay with the standards. Those are super critical. Basically, user research, user input, building the empathy, and to stay with the standards, like using standard controls, putting the back button, making sure the standard gestures work. Those are all super critical to make sure that we are able to build for all these users. I want to talk about, Luke, do you want to talk about a little more on the empathy, how we can build it in our day-to-day work?
Yeah. So for the people in the room who haven't seen this before, what's wrong with this slide? What's that? Okay. What else? Okay. The titles? Okay. So what's really interesting here is this. So if you're colorblind, us men, 1 in 12 of us is colorblind, and for women, 1 in 200. So imagine, see the difference? See the difference? If I'm completely colorblind, I'm going to see in variations, and if I'm trying to represent something in this page with this graph, I'm not going to be able to represent it very well to somebody who might be colorblind, right? And this functionality to catch things like this is built into PowerPoint and the Office products, if you guys use those Office products. And it's super simple to use. But let me just show you a couple other examples. So here's a couple other ways to differentiate. See how it's just a slight shift in building your empathy when you're doing a graphical representation. You can change the line structure. You can use shapes to differentiate the data that you're trying to accomplish. And this is how accessibility has a tendency to be this big, elephant in the room. How do we address it? How do we start if we haven't started already? And these are just a few examples. Just building the empathy into your day-to-day. There's an accessibility checker on PowerPoint. There's an accessibility checker built into the Office products in Word. So checking those things. So for people who send a lot of decks, I do a lot of decks. Manish does a lot of decks. There's a couple other folks in the room. And it's just getting into the habit of running your accessibility checker against PowerPoint. And we only have a couple minutes left, so I wanted to leave it open for questions. But we can certainly demo the accessibility checker in PowerPoint if you guys want to see us afterwards, maybe outside or even at our booth. But this is how we start. This is how we start to build the empathy. This is how we start to think about accessibility and just build it into our day-to-day activities. How many people in the room send emails and use colors in their emails? Right, same thing, right? So it's the same thing. You got to find a different way to represent that information in a way that can be ascertained by somebody. So for instance, I'll give you guys a perfect example. Great friend of mine, I've known him for years. I ran into him here at Ignite, and he was saying, hey, I really want to come to your accessibility session. I was like, great, you should. And then he told me he was colorblind. I've known this guy for 10 years. We've been friends for 10 years. I've never known that. Never knew that. So, and people in the communities, for especially people who are colorblind or other areas, they may not want to say anything. So we have to build for them too. So, with a couple minutes left, I wanted to open up for questions, and if there's no questions, I've got some other stuff we can talk about quickly. Yeah. Uh-huh. Yeah. Yeah. Did you catch that one?
Yeah, I can repeat the question. Please correct me if I missed it. You're building a new HR application using SharePoint. You're in the design phase, and you want to know what should you do to think about accessibility. What tools and methods should you use, right? So, great question. If you have the ability, the best thing you can do for yourself is in your user research, in your design phase, get some people with disabilities involved. If you cannot get that, get designers who have had experience with accessibility in the past, get them involved. If you don't have that capability in your existing designers, there's a lot of third parties who do this. There's companies like Applause, and even all of the other accessibility related companies. There's a lot of them in the market who would do the review for you for your designs up front. SharePoint itself has a lot of guidance in documentation on how to make SharePoint sites accessible, how to design, how to make sure the heading structures are correct, and so on, how the color contrast is correct. But really getting design level support is critical for getting it right. As a matter of fact, about 74% of all accessibility issues can actually be caught and corrected at the time of design. Only 26% are implementation related, if you just look at the standard. So early intervention will give you the best results. Also build it into your engineering cycles. There is automated tools like Accessibility Insights. It's an open source tool created by Microsoft. It's a Chrome extension or an Edge Insider extension, the Edge Chrome extension that you can install. It will test your application automatically and give you all the common issues like color contrast, wrong heading structure, and things like that, missing alt text. It can do that automatically for you. Also, it gives you like about 21 manual tests. If you go through all of those tests, you would have covered all of the WCAG guidelines around accessibility. Did that answer your question?
And if you have any other questions, we can chat after too. Yes.
Hey, I'm Bryce from Xbox. I'm one of the inventors of the adaptive controller.
Excellent.
I just wanted to make a small correction, because I don't want to take credit. That when you said earlier that Xbox had some games out, 66% and 95%, those are games on our platform. They're made by Ubisoft. I'd hate to take credit for our partners' excellent work. That was Assassin's Creed Origins was 60%, and Assassin's Creed Odyssey, where they left the captions on by default, was 95%.
Excellent.
Wow.
Thank you so much.
Yeah,
I'll
thank
repeat
you.
it on the microphone for if somebody was not able to hear. The Xbox games I talked about earlier, they were created by a partner called Vsoft on the Xbox platform, not by the Xbox team. Assassin's Creed and Assassin's Creed Odyssey were the two games. And Assassin's Creed had it at 60%, and Odyssey left it on by default, and which was at 95%. Did I get those?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Great. Other questions? Yes.
You said you shared your PowerPoints out. Do you not put them in PDF? I feel like every time we stick something in a PDF, we lose a lot of the accessibility that start out in Word or in PowerPoint just by converting it.
Yep.
You have a whole other task ahead of you in
Yep.
the PDF.
Yeah. Internally, when I'm sharing decks internally, I don't convert them to PDF for that very reason, and I find it difficult because sometimes I'll share out decks, and I want people to give feedback on those decks. I want them to update content. But there are people that certainly do convert to PDF. And if you don't get in the habit of using that accessibility checker, when you convert it to PDF, to your point, you're going to run into all sorts of issues because now you're going to have a PDF file that's not accessible.
Even when we do the checker, sometimes
Yep.
it catches the header
Yep.
word and then doesn't.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, PDFs are nasty. That
He said it, not me. Any other questions? Great. Well, thank you guys for coming. There's a number of other accessibility sessions too throughout the Ignite. We're also at the Microsoft booth 27 in the hub. I'll be over there in a few minutes once I make the hike over there. So please feel free to come by. We're happy to have more in-depth conversations with you guys, and hope you guys enjoy the rest of your Ignite.
Thank you.